The views and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the podcast or of its host Rob Drake.
How we escaped.
This podcast episode contains themes of abuse and control and may also contain strong language. Listener discretion is advised. On a cool night in June 1997, in an ordinary living room somewhere in Vancouver, Canada, a woman sits across from two people she has known for years. One of them is Michael, a man she has been close friends with for nearly a decade, and someone she has come to deeply love. The other is Michael's wife, Jessica, and Michael is about to make a request that will change everything.
So what was being asked at the time was that I become a third party in Michael and Jessica's marriage. So the cult leader wanted me to become Michael's mistress while he was still married to Jessica. And this conversation happened in their living room. Jessica was present. She knew that this was going to be requested of me for several weeks, I think, before I knew what was happening.
My guest today is Alexandra Amor. She is the author of the book Cult, a love story. 10 years inside a Canadian cult and the subsequent long road of recovery.
As there always is in a cult, there had been a slow build-up for Michael and Jessica to this moment. They weren't just thrown into it in one conversation. The cult leader had really walked them toward this goal for quite a while, and as cult leaders will do, she positioned it in a way that made it seem like it was important for the universe and for our service to God, which was the primary purpose of the group.
In our show notes, you'll find a link to Alexandra's book, Cult, a love story. It's available in print, Kindle, and audiobook. This is an important read. Yes, it's a gripping personal story, but it's also a quiet education in how ordinary, intelligent people get drawn into the grip of a high control group. And we'll hear how after a decade in the group, Alexandra finally found her way out. That's what we're exploring today on the How We Escaped podcast.
This is the How We Escaped podcast. And now, here's your host, Rob Drake.
Greetings, fellow sojourners. Welcome to the How We Escaped podcast.
So there we sat, and they pitched this idea, and I had to make a decision then and there.
So, Jessica knew about this beforehand. Michael knew about this beforehand, but you didn't. What was your reaction as you were sitting there listening to this request to become Michael's mistress?
Well, as you can imagine, I was completely stunned and, just absolutely flabbergasted. I had questions. They had explained the events that had led up to this suggestion from Spirit, which was how the cult leader positioned the guidance that she was receiving, either from Spirit or from God. It was how she usually positioned it. Yeah, mostly I think I was just absolutely stunned. Now, the advantage that I had in that moment was that I was leaving to go on a holiday. I had long planned to go to England for a month and do a lot of hiking. So there was a bit of a incubation period for myself as well. So I was able to take some time and reflect while I was away. So we were able to collectively position it that I had agreed to this, but I had this time period when I could adjust to what was happening.
We're going to come back to this story and, of course, talk more about Michael because he figures so prominently in your book. But let's go back to the beginning of your involvement with this group. And you open your book with this statement: nobody joins a cult. So when you look back at your 22-year-old self, what was the need that this group fulfilled for you, and how did you join?
Yeah, that quote is from Deborah Layton, who wrote a book about her experience in a cult. And the idea is that we never join what we think is a cult. We join groups of people who have similar interests to us or who seem to be offering something that we're trying to learn. They can be political groups, they can be sales groups, even these high demand conditions can arise in things like multi-level marketing groups. But the idea is that nobody ever goes into a group thinking, oh, this is a cult and I'd love to join that. We do join groups because we think they will help us or benefit us or teach us in some way. So the group that I joined was a class. It was a meditation class in Vancouver. And my mom had joined a few months prior. And then I moved to the city after I finished university and didn't know anybody, was living with my parents, didn't have any friends. I was looking for a job and for a place to live. And my mom asked if I wanted to go to the meditation class with her. And I thought, well, I've got nothing else going on at this time in my life. So why not?
What was it like that first night that you joined?
As soon as I walked into the room that first night, I felt some part of me responded in a way that made me feel like this was something I had been looking for my whole adult life. To this day, I can't explain why my body reacted in that way. It's an interesting thing to reflect on given what unfolded for the next 10 years. But anyway, that was my response. It felt like a friendly group of people. And it was just a normal average group of individuals who were interested in personal growth and meditation, obviously. And the leader was an Austrian woman, Canadian Austrian, I guess we should say, and very charismatic, of course, as these people tend to be. And she sort of fancied herself a psychic medium, and she gave readings. That was her day job. And then she taught this class about meditation once a week. And it was more than meditation too. It was about, visualization and connecting with the divine and connecting with spirit guides and angels and all that kind of stuff. And these were all things that I was completely unfamiliar with.
Do you remember the first time that you met Limori, and what was your first impression of her? What was she like?
Well, she was there. So the room was long and rectangular. And so she was down at one end, and I must have seen her, there. Probably didn't speak to her on the first night. And everyone got settled in these couch type things that were all around the walls of the room. So yeah, though I don't remember specifically, I think generally my impression of her was she seemed very self-possessed, confident, sure of herself, which were all things that I wasn't. So that was really intriguing to me, that she felt good about herself. She had this little entourage, I guess you could call it, around her. So she had a sort of a right-hand woman who did everything for her, and a few other people that were there that had obviously known her long before this class had begun. She just seemed interesting and unique and appealing. And I was a little bit afraid of her too. She was so self-confident. You could just tell she was not someone you would ever mess with. She was physically large. She was quite tall. And then she was probably 150 pounds overweight. So she really had a very big presence, very platinum blonde hair, and always very well put together in terms of her clothing, like sort of dressed up quite fancy, even in the most mundane circumstances.
And so, what would you do? Kind of take us through a typical session with her. What were you doing together?
Yeah, so everybody would sort of mill around. And then when it was the top of the hour, when the class was supposed to begin, everybody would sit down and she would maybe talk about a subject initially, and we would all kind of get settled in, and then we would have a meditation. And so everybody would close their eyes, and typically the meditations were guided, and that meant that she would be speaking and we would just be following the guidance. And sometimes they were what you would call guided visualizations. So she would walk us, you're walking through a forest, and there's a green path, and you eventually come to a little pond, and you look in the pond and you see your reflection, or you see something that's there. And then the meditations might go on for half an hour or maybe 45 minutes. And then afterwards, there would be discussion and questions. So people could ask any questions they wanted of her, and she would answer based on what her spirit guides told her. That was about it. And then at the end, when it was all wrapping up, we would mingle again for a little while and then head out the door.
Yeah, so you talk about these spirit guides that she claimed to have. Did it seem to you that she had any sort of inside knowledge about you or about people in the group? I mean, was she claiming to be a prophet?
She wasn't claiming to be a prophet, but there was definitely an impression, and I don't know if she said it directly at that time, but we were always giving the impression that yes, she had inside information into how the universe worked because of her connection to her spirit guides, and she knew more about us as individuals than we did. And again, she wouldn't say that directly, but that was just the impression that she gave. And like any charismatic leader with ill intentions, there's sort of it's grooming really that happens. So she was grooming each of us to think of her as the clearest one, meaning the person with the most access to the truth of how things work, and that following her guidance was to our best advantage. Not doing what she said would land us in dire circumstances.
Early on, when your mother was still in this group, I know she left before you did, but did you have discussions with your mother about her and about this group? And did either of you have any concerns, or were there red flags early on?
No, zero red flags early on. I think we were both quite naive. And remember too, this is like 1989, and there just wasn't the public awareness about coercive control and high demand groups and cults that there is now. I think back to then, and there was just absolutely nothing ever in the media. And the things that did come out were extreme examples of the way that cults work. So things like Jonestown, of course, that had happened. But because that was so extreme, it never would have occurred to us that was a situation that we were in. And so, yeah, like I say, zero red flags. We just thought it was a good time. We were excited to be learning from this woman who we felt very privileged to have access to.
From reading your book, it seems like this group was very small when you joined, and it stayed small. How did Limori recruit people into this group?
Yeah, great question. I've reflected on that a lot. So the way she initially recruited, which was before I joined, was there was an organization in Vancouver called the Psychic Society, and she used to go to meetings and stuff there. And I think she would give readings there as well. It was on West Broadway near Spruce Street. And that was before my time. So I think eventually what happened was she sort of broke off and created this group of her own and brought a bunch of people with her and found the space to rent on Wednesday nights. And that's where we were having the meditation class. And then as far as, after that, it was really just word of mouth. People who were already involved would recommend it to their friends or their families and that kind of thing, just like my mom did with me. But she didn't seem to be, recruiting seemed to be something that she wasn't great at, looking back in hindsight. And the group really never got very big. It got to be about maximum, I would say, 50 people. And then that was the peak, and then it just tailed off from there.
What were the financial obligations of the members of this group? Were you all paying per session?
The way that it worked was we just paid when we went to the meditation class, and it was really minimal. It was like $10 to attend the meditation class each week. But then what she did was, which was a classic cult leader move, she created a second night of a meditation class, but it was invitation only. And so cult leaders do this deliberately so that they're creating a hierarchy within the larger group. And what it also does is it creates kind of a yearning in the people that are not in the invitation only group. And I wasn't for quite a while. So I was always striving and wondering what else I could do to get into that invitation only group. And that group, I think, was a little bit more financially beholden to the cult leader. So things would happen like she and her husband, who she had married somewhere along the road here, owned a fishing lodge and resort up in the Chilcotin Plateau, which is an area in central British Columbia. And sometimes they wouldn't be able to pay the mortgage. And so the invitation only, which we called the Thursday group, they would pass the hat around metaphorically and collect enough money so that the mortgage could be paid at the fishing lodge. Then, as the years went by, I did observe that people in the group were giving her chunks of money. I didn't really pay too much attention to it at the time, but when I was writing the book and when I was looking back, I realized that there was some financial support going on from members of the group, but the group really did support her lifestyle in the end. She couldn't have done what she did without the people supporting her. And later on down the road, she ended up doing things like she would live in Hawaii for months at a time, or Arizona. And keep in mind, this is a person without a job, and that none of that could have happened without the support of the group. Older adults who were well positioned in life. You're right, she could just leverage those relationships for sure.
And this is where Michael enters Alexandra's life. He was already part of this group and was friends with Alexandra's mom. If you recall in our introduction, Michael would later ask Alexandra to be a third party to his marriage, at the behest of the cult leader Limori. Michael was 16 years older than Alexandra.
I think I felt a combination of, a little bit uncomfortable with him, just because he seemed a little bit more worldly than people I was used to, and then also quite comfortable with him. And what ended up happening was, over the next 6 or 7 or 8 years, we became exceptionally close friends. And we were very similar in terms of interests and just things we like to talk about. And of course, that we had the whole spiritual pursuit bit in common. And he was a very kind person, independently employed, like self-employed, had always been, really valued a sense of freedom, and a bit of a womanizer, honestly. He was dating Jessica when I first met him, and kind of had a reputation of being a bit of a playboy, but still, really, really a nice guy, and very thoughtful and intelligent, and had a great sense of humor. So that's kind of how our relationship started, was within, a 7 or 8 year friendship, which was really nice.
So when you met Michael, could you have ever imagined that he would become the source for so much anguish and pain in your life in the years to come?
No, not at all. Yeah, it's so funny the way things unfold, isn't it? If we had foresight, we'd probably do things very differently. But no, I didn't have any idea how what a principal figure he would become in my life, and B, yeah, what kind of anguish would come from that.
So you mentioned this inner circle that you were waiting to get invited to join, and it seems like you got invited pretty quickly. How did you feel when you were invited to join the Thursday night meetings?
I just felt so honored. I felt so, and of course, this is exactly how cult leaders set it up, is that you feel special and singled out for your specialness. And the way that Limori always positioned the work that we were doing, quote unquote, the work that we were doing via meditating and dealing with our issues, was that it was serving the light, serving God, and that it was extremely important work. And she, of course, set up the dynamic that cult leaders always do, that there's us that are doing this important work, and there's them, which was everybody else on the planet. And we were sort of the awakened ones who were, serving the light, making sure that in the battles that were taking place between light and dark out in the universe, that we were the light workers, the ones, fighting for the good guys, and that everyone else on the planet was asleep and unaware of what we were doing and unaware of how important we were. So being pulled into that exclusive Thursday night meditation circle just felt like an affirmation of who I was, and it gave me a real sense of purpose, of course, and a sense of belonging. So I felt like I belonged to the Wednesday class. And then when I graduated and was also going to Thursday class, I got a greater sense of belonging. Now I really belong. But of course, there's always further to go. And there were people who followed Limori, who lived at the fishing resort, and they were the next level up on the hierarchical ladder that she had set up. So there's this automatic setup, essentially, for people who are in a cult, that there's always another place to go. You can always be better and do more. And that being caught in that feeling of striving is what really is one of the things that keeps a person hooked into this kind of situation.
And of course, you did eventually make it up to that next level. But before that happened, your mother leaves this group. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, that was, now you asked about red flags, and this should have been a red flag for both of us. So what happened was that Limori was channeling an entity that she called Irene, and she had a couple of right-hand women in the group, and one of them was also a medium, and she gave readings and all that stuff. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this right-hand woman started saying that she was channeling Irene as well. And then there became a rift between these two women. And they each were saying, no, I'm the one who's really channeling this spiritual entity, and the other woman is the false person. And so there ended up being a split in the group. So the two women split up, and the other woman took a group of followers with her, and she set up her own separate meetings. And my mom went with that woman, and then I stayed with Limori. And like I say, this should have been a huge red flag, because We should have asked more questions at this point. Why was this happening? If the spiritual information that these women were receiving was true, then why were they arguing about who was the true channeler of this spiritual entity? And why was there this rift between them if they were both serving the light and serving God? And so, yeah, although we should have asked all those kinds of questions, and we didn't. So my mom split away, and then eventually that group just dissolved, the one that split off, and pretty quickly, I would say within like a month or two.
Yeah, it's funny to me to hear you describe it like this because it reminds me of a church split, which is what happens quite a bit, especially in the evangelical world in the US. You have two people who are claiming to speak for God and they disagree with each other, and half the church goes with one person. But I wanted to ask you about these entities. You mentioned one of them, Irene. Do you think this was all made up or invented, or do you think there was actually something to this? Do you think Limori was truly channeling spirits?
That's such a good question, and I really don't have a definitive answer. And I've thought about this a lot, and I think with cult leaders, even if they're not this type, even if they're not people who say that they're a medium and that they're channeling spirits, there's a certain amount of believing their own spin. And I think that was definitely the case with Limori. And then conversely, there's this awareness in them, there must be, that they are manipulating the people that are following them. So, who knows? Were those entities real? I don't think so. I think she was making up most of what was going on. I think she was extremely perceptive about how people operate and what our wounds were, the individuals that were following her, what our wounds were and what our psychological issues or trauma were. And she really knew how to press our buttons and really just play us like instruments. And she was just an absolute master at that. And so she used the whole spiritual connection thing as one of the tools in her toolbox, probably one of the main ones. But yeah, was it real? I don't know.
I never want to appear sympathetic to a cult leader, but I wanted to get your perspective on what you think her intentions were. Do you think she knew what she was doing? Do you think that she knew that she was inflicting harm on people? Or do you think there was some sense of she had good intentions, but she was just going about it the wrong way?
Well, I think based on, the education that I've had about cults since I left, and then thinking about her in hindsight, I think she had ill intention for sure. I don't think she was innocently going about her business, thinking that she was a psychic medium. I think she genuinely wanted to manipulate people. And the way I was really able to see that was true was when I wrote the book, actually, because in order to explain it to the reader who has maybe never been in a situation like this, I just wanted to be really clear about what I was sharing and explain it in a way that would be easy for the reader to understand. And so because I had to go through that exercise just in my own mind, I was able to see, it was like looking at a chessboard from 2 or 3 feet above it. I was able to look back and see, oh, okay, so Limori had this happen. She manipulated this person in this way so that 6 months later she could manipulate that person in that way. And at the time, of course, I couldn't see it happening. I was a piece on the chessboard. And so I was just dealing with whatever was going on with me. But by explaining it so that others could understand, I could really see how calculated she was about the things that she was doing and the reasons that she was doing them, destabilizing people by, for example, the story we told right at the beginning of this interview, by breaking up a marriage, by inserting someone else into the marriage. And that's a classic technique that cult leaders use, which is really inserting themselves into people's relationships because they want the primary loyalty of each individual to be to themselves, to the cult leader. And if your loyalty, so that's sort of the vertical relationship, if your loyalty is going horizontally to your spouse or your child, then that interferes with the vertical relationship. So she did things like that. And I think she did them not just with myself and Michael and his wife, Jessica, with lots of other couples in the group. And she even started to interfere in my mother's marriage before my mother split off with that other woman. And yeah, that's a really, really manipulative thing to do.
When I hear you describe it this way, and after reading your book, the word that comes to my mind is evil. Is that a word that you would be willing to use for her?
Well, that's a good question too. My belief now, or understanding about anyone who's a human being, is that we're all coming from a place of dealing with our own wounds. And I think in this case, she was really a wounded person. And this is where how she dealt with those wounded parts of herself. And unfortunately, I know almost nothing about her background before she became a cult leader. But I think in order to be the type of person that she was, she had to have been coming from a deeply wounded background. And so I wouldn't use the word evil. I would use the word damaged, severely damaged, and then acting out in order to cope with whatever was going on inside of herself.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what happened when you had the opportunity, or what I'm sure you felt like was an incredible privilege at the time, to live with Limori in her home. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, so there was herself and her husband, and then there were one or two other women usually living there. They shared a room, and then I had my own room. And it was bizarre. I was only there for about 6 months because then I got into trouble with her. And it was interesting seeing how her life was on a day-to-day basis. So she gave readings in the home. And I would come home sometimes I was actually in school at the time, and would have to just very quietly go down the hall to my room because I could tell that she was having a reading in the living room. And it was a 24/7 performance, definitely. I guess that's the best way to put it. She was never off. So no matter what time of day it was, no matter who was around her, no matter what they were doing, she was always in cult leader mode, although I wouldn't have described it that way at the time. Everything had spiritual meaning. People were coming in and out of the house, at all hours. We threw a party one time, and that had really specific spiritual significance according to her. It was terrifying as well, because my body and my sense of self-preservation, or whatever it was screaming at me the whole time that this was an unsafe situation to be in. But the way that I interpreted all the butterflies in my stomach and the nervousness that I felt, and the anxiety and fear, was that I just wasn't a good enough spiritual worker. That if I was a better person, if I was better at meditating, or at clearing out my issues, which was a big thing that she was always on about, that then I wouldn't be nervous and afraid. And so it was a really difficult time for me, really personally challenging, because I was caught between a rock and a hard place, essentially. I had this compulsion to to be better and to serve the thing, the forces in the universe that she said were important. And yet there was this intuitive part of myself that knew that something was wrong. And I just didn't know how to listen to that part of myself at that time.
When I read about this in your book, these signals that your body was sending, it seems like you really blamed yourself for these, kind of like you just alluded to here. Do you feel like somehow she managed to turn your own intuition against you?
Definitely. Yeah. Cause I would talk about feeling nervous and feeling wondering. The way that I put it to her was I feel like I'm always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And so, like I said earlier, she was so perceptive about people and about our neuroses or the way that we operated in the world. So I'm certain that she used that against each individual person that was following her.
The good times at Limori's house did not last, and Alexandra was evicted.
So she said that, ultimately after the 6 months, she said that my energy was bad and that I was, energetically doing all these terrible things to her and to the other people in the house. So I needed to leave. And this was a technique that she used again and again and again with others in the group as well. The analogy that I use in the book is that it's like when there's a herd of horses and there's a lead mare. And when one of the young horses, the foal, misbehaves, the lead mare will evict the foal from the herd. And the herd is what protects the horses. And the foal knows this instinctively. So it knows that in order to get back into the herd, it needs to behave itself. And that's exactly what Limori did with each of us at individual times. She would send us out into the wilderness, metaphorically, so that we would, and I only saw this in hindsight, of course, but so that we would bend more easily to her control in order to get back into the group and in order to get back into the safety of being around her.
How we escaped.
Hi, Rob Drake here. Do you have a story of escape to share with us on the How We Escaped podcast? We'd love to hear your story and to consider airing it on our show. You can contact us right now by heading over to howweescaped.com and filling out our contact form. That's howweescaped.com. You can also reach out to us on Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram.
You're listening to the How We Escaped podcast with Rob Drake.
You wrote at one point in your book that you loved Limori, but you also say that you don't think she was capable of loving you or anybody else in the group back. How can those two things be possible at the same time?
Yeah, I think for me, she was a real parental figure. I think I was looking for strong but loving leadership in my life, which I hadn't had growing up. And so I really was devoted to her and would call that love in a certain way. It certainly wasn't reciprocal. I don't think it's necessary for love to occur for it to be reciprocal. So she didn't love us. She used us. She made it look like love. Like she could present that performance because she knew us each so well. That can feel like love when it's coming at you. Like, I really understand you. I know what makes you tick. And, when she would make comments about us as individuals, they were often kind of gentle and teasing. And there's a certain comfort that comes with that when someone sees you and is at times gentle and loving in the way that they're presenting that information to you. It really strikes a chord in everyone, I think, but especially those people who haven't necessarily received that kind of attention as children, and as growing up. So yeah, so we definitely, I think I can speak for others as well and say that we loved her and were devoted to her. But she, unfortunately, she was just using us and making it look like love.
Well, I want to get back to Michael because really this relationship with him is at the heart of your book. And it seems like, during these years, your friendship with him is deepening and perhaps becoming something else. But then Limori decides that it's time for Michael and Jessica, who he had been with for many years, to get married. And I was wondering what you think. Obviously, you can't be inside Michael's mind, but what do you think he was thinking at that time when he was being pressured to marry Jessica? I mean, by that time, do you think he had doubts about it? Did he want to marry her? Did he have feelings for you? What do you think was going on there?
Yeah, it was a really complex situation. And to kind of bottom line it, what was going on, I think, in hindsight, was that Michael had never wanted to be married. He was quite a free spirit. Like I said, he was always independently employed, um, uh, and just loved to travel, was a big fan of just freedom and, personal freedom and pursuing the life that he wanted. He was not a guy who wanted to settle down and have kids. So in order for Limori to have a lot of control over Michael, what she did was she presented this idea of him getting married to Jessica. And he and Jessica had been dating, and I know he loved her, absolutely, but he was kind of a serial monogamist. I don't think he ever considered marrying any of the people that he dated. He just liked being in long-term monogamous relationships, and then when they had run their course, he liked to move on. He wasn't searching for a life partner. What cult leaders want more than anything is to control the people around them, because once they are able to do that and get the person to do almost anything, then their measure of power has gone up exponentially. So getting Michael to marry Jessica was a real exercise in, I think, Limori figuring out how much she could control Michael. And it happened over a period of 2 or 3 years, and she just sort of gradually introduced him to the idea. And then they had this spiritual wedding when we were up at the lodge one time for a retreat. And then eventually, they had a legal wedding ceremony in Hawaii. And what a cult leader is doing all the time is trying to figure out who will be the most loyal to them, who will go the furthest for them and do the most for them, as the cult leader is controlling the person. And so this exercise in getting Michael to marry Jessica was really about that. And she got him to do it.
Let's talk about this place called Wolf's Den, which you talk about quite a bit in your book. What was Wolf's Den, and how did Limori use it to control the group?
So Wolf's Den was and is a rustic fishing resort in the Chilcotin Plateau, and it's situated right on a lake, the main building. And then there's a few acres of property. I don't remember how many exactly, maybe 4 or 5 or 6. And there's little cabins dotted about the property, and people can go there and stay on vacation. And it's sort of a Canadian wilderness experience. When you stay there, you can fish, and in the winter you can cross-country ski, and you can hike in the good weather and that kind of stuff. So the property and the lodge had originally belonged to a man that Limori ended up marrying, and then she got him to sign over the deed to the property to her. And so it became kind of the central hub of her work. And eventually she ended up living there when she wasn't living in Hawaii or Arizona. And we would have spiritual retreats there. That's what she used it for. for a few years. And so we would go up there, the Wednesday and Thursday night classes would go up for 4, 5, 6 days at a time. And they were what we called workshops. And we would just meditate, and she would do her cult leader stuff, which was getting us to confess to our sins, which is one of Robert Lifton's criteria for thought reform. We did those things over a period of several years. Eventually, I stopped going because I was getting uncomfortable. My authentic self was coming into the fore, and I was feeling discomfort with it. But yeah, that's what Wolf's Den was.
So now we come back to that living room scene. You've agreed to become the third party in Michael and Jessica's marriage. And ironically, it's after this, once you begin this relationship with Michael, that maybe some of the first cracks start to appear in your relationship with the cult. And you talk about a vacation to Hawaii with Michael that was very significant. Tell us about this.
Yeah, there were 3 of us in the relationship for a year, although Michael and Jessica weren't sleeping together at that time. They were living together, but they slept in separate bedrooms. And then Michael and I dated. And then after a year, they ended up separating formally and beginning divorce proceedings. And yeah, at some point, Michael and I went on a vacation to Hawaii, and it was really, really lovely. There were a couple things that started to happen that had me questioning Limori and whether or not she was actually who she said she was, whether or not she was actually telling the truth and had access to God, and was she operating in our best interests and those kinds of things. But as those questions started to come up, they're so incredibly uncomfortable, because what's happening is your thoughts are asking you to go against everything you know to be true at that time. So there's this real battle going on inside the person, in this case me, trying to figure out what's real. And one of the things that high demand groups do, and it's one of the primary things, is they teach the person to be afraid of their own thoughts. So you're not allowed to think certain things. And in our case, thinking certain things would bring about bad energy, right? And so I said that was the purpose of everything we did, was to have good energy and to be serving the light. So if you even had a thought that questioned what was going on, you would then be afraid of that thought, because it might bring about bad energy and that sort of thing. So I was really wrestling with having those kind of thoughts come up and then pushing them away, but they were becoming more and more prominent.
While Alexandra may have been wrestling with her doubts about Limori and the group, Michael seemed to be falling even more deeply under Limori's spell.
And then there was a day where Michael and I this was just in Vancouver. Limori was passing through town, and she was staying at a hotel in Richmond, which is a suburb of Vancouver. And we went out to visit her at this airport hotel and spent the afternoon with her. And a number of things happened that day that were really uncomfortable for me and started to bring up more questions. I noticed what a kiss ass Michael was being to Limori. I noticed that in her presence, he was really submissive, and how much he adored her and would do anything for her. And it was not nice to see. And it had me questioning. And then after that, I confronted him about something that had come up for me about what Limori was saying about someone else in the group that was really uncomfortable for me. And what I said to him was, Limori always tells us that we can challenge her with any question that we have. And yet when we do, she really pushes back and makes it seem as though, or tells us outright, that we're wrong to question her about the thing. So that dissonance was really uncomfortable for me and confusing. And I brought it up verbally with him and said that just to him on a walk one day. And I just saw the look of confusion on his face. And this was a case where there was so much that was unspoken in the group. You just, because of this fear of having bad energy, there was so much that we didn't address and didn't talk about. And when there was something that Limori did that contradicted what she said we were supposed to be doing, we just wouldn't address it. And so this was the first time, I think maybe ever, that I had addressed something, that I had spoken out loud about something that wasn't making sense to me, and where it seemed like Limori was at fault. And that was a real turning point, because like I say, I could see the confusion on Michael's face, and he didn't have an answer for me. And it was left hanging in the air like a thought bubble. And I just remember for the rest of the walk reflecting on that. And I carried it with me for days then. Why was there this incongruence, and why couldn't we find a satisfactory answer for it? So that was kind of what turned out to be the beginning of the end for me.
Twice now, Alexandra, you've observed that Michael was a free spirit. And your book makes so clear that ordinary people, genuinely good people, intelligent people, can get caught up in these groups. And when you look at someone like Michael, who was clearly intelligent, what does this tell us about the limits of intelligence or education as protection against manipulation?
Yeah, I think it just tells us everything, because anybody who hasn't had an experience with coercive control, and luckily most people haven't, it's such a hard thing to understand from a logical perspective. And yes, Michael and the rest of us were intelligent and thoughtful people, but what cult leaders do is they use the levers that will work with each individual person in order to get them under their grasp. And they're really good at it. So yes, Michael he really appreciated freedom. He was a real free spirit. And of course, he had some psychological stuff going on where he was susceptible to being manipulated and coerced like the rest of us. And the one, bit of genius that every cult leader has is being able to use each person's psychological weaknesses against them. And again, the reason there's a frog on the front of my book is that it's a very slow, incremental process. And the analogy is the whole frog in boiling water scenario. So it doesn't happen overnight. And, we've been talking on this show, and this is stuff that went on over a period of 10 years. So it really happens very slowly and very incrementally. And you don't notice it happening until it's too late.
And so now Limori turns against you. Tell us
Yes, absolutely.
about that. What happened?
We hadn't seen her on a regular basis. And by we, I mean the meditation class, the Wednesday and Thursday night groups. We had kind of been left on our own for several years. She had gone off, and she was either living at Wolf's Den, like I said, or she was living in Hawaii or Arizona. So in 1999, Michael suggested that for New Year's, we go to Wolf's Den and spend a few days there. And ironically, Limori wasn't there. She was in Arizona, but he thought it would be nice if we spent some time up there with the other members of the group who lived there permanently. So we flew up, and the first day was okay. And then it was the 30th of December, and Michael was on the phone with Limori for most of the afternoon. I'm talking, this was a 3 or 4 hour telephone conversation. This was, before cell phones or anything like that. And he was in a bedroom with a telephone on a long cord that was from the kitchen. Anyway, so I was floating around the lodge, and again, my body told me that something bad was about to happen. My stomach was full of butterflies, and my heart was pounding, and I just couldn't settle down. And I some instinctive part of me knew that, yeah, the axe was going to fall. So in the end, in the late afternoon, Michael came out of the bedroom and hung up the phone, and he came over to the kitchen table, and he gathered the other people who lived there at the lodge full time around. So there were 3 other people, and he broke up with me. He just said, God says that I need to move into the new millennium unencumbered, and therefore we're going to break up. And he basically said, do you have anything to say? And I was just absolutely stunned and humiliated that this was happening in front of other people, and that obviously I had absolutely no say in the matter. And that was it. So I was, shocked. Doesn't even begin to describe how I felt. So I spent the rest of the day and that night in the cabin, and Michael moved all his stuff out of the cabin into a different part of the lodge. And then the next day, they got me a flight. It was the 31st, I guess, then, New Year's Eve. They got me a flight back to Vancouver by myself. And then thus began my journey to figure out what had happened to me, and begin the journey of recovery, which took a very long time, almost another 10 years.
I was reading the part in the book about Michael being on the phone for 4 hours with Limori. Do you have any hope or feeling in your heart that he was pushing back or arguing with her about this? Or do you think that he was just listening?
I think he was being convinced. I don't know that he would have pushed back all that hard, but I think he would have needed some convincing that this was the right thing to do. And she would have, pulled out all the spiritual big guns about how important it was. And what she would have done is tell him how important he was, right? So she would build up his ego so that he would feel important enough that he had to make this difficult choice, which was really skillful on her part and something she did constantly. And again, just she pushed the right buttons. I don't think he had a really strong sense of self-esteem. He'd never been super successful in the businesses that he had. I think this was the area of his life where he was able to feel successful. And so she would have positioned it like, if you want to get ahead, so to speak, she probably wouldn't have used those words, but if you want to be successful as this spiritual warrior that you are, then you need to make these kinds of difficult decisions.
So this breakup with Michael was, I believe, the catalyst to you leaving the group. I know you didn't leave right away, but tell us about the moment when you decided finally that you had to leave this group, when you woke up, in a sense.
Yeah, so when I got back to Vancouver, I was shattered, and it was really traumatic. And it was my mom who ended up suggesting that I see a therapist. So I did that, and I saw her weekly for those first few months of the year 2000. And the subject of cults never came up, even though the therapist got me to read a book called The Guru Papers, and which I highly recommend. I borrowed her copy. She brought it in, and I read it, and I was stunned. And the crazy thing is, I recognized so much of our group in that book, but I just thought, wow, isn't this a crazy coincidence? Like, I really didn't connect the dots that what I was learning about was that I was involved in a cult. So then I went out and bought my own copy of the book, and I read it again, and I highlighted everything, and still I didn't put the dots together. But what I was doing was questioning what was going on and feeling a lot of discomfort for the way that people were treated in the group. And I had always felt that kind of discomfort, but I had pushed it down, justifying it because we were serving God and serving the light. And so gradually, that discomfort just kind of started to grow. And I realized that there was a real dissonance between what I believed to be my own values of love and compassion and what the group was exhibiting. And so I lived with that discomfort for weeks, maybe months. And then eventually it just got so exhausting and confusing. And I finally realized I needed to make a decision about what I was doing and which side of the fence I was going to fall on.
And then, once again, another significant event for Alexandra takes place in a living room. But this time, it's in her own living room.
I just sat in my living room one day in the chair that I typically meditated in and closed my eyes and tried to settle myself down. And I remember it was such a momentous decision that I was trying to make that I was physically shaking, like my arms were shaking as I sat there. And the reason it felt like such a big deal is because what I was making the choice to do was to leave God. Because we had been told, of course, that everything we did was with the intention in mind of serving God. Everything had been positioned that way. And every choice we made and like I say, every thought I had was monitored so that it was serving God and serving the light. So, and I truly believed that that's what we were doing. So to turn my back on that felt absolutely terrifying. But what I ultimately realized was that I couldn't live without love and compassion in my life. And it just seemed to me like the group wasn't exhibiting those behaviors and aligning itself with those values, even though verbally they said they were. So as I sat there, I just decided, if I have to take a chance away from quote unquote God and live with the values of love and compassion, then that's what I have to do. And as soon as I realized that, it was just such a huge relief. And I opened my eyes and I was crying, but I was free finally after 10, 11 years of being trapped. You can hear the emotion in my voice. So yeah, even now, 25 years later. So it was just a huge moment and such an example of what people go through when they're in this kind of coercive environment and just the knots that it ties in your head. Yeah. So that was in October of 2000. And then I stayed in therapy. And eventually, it took me 3 years, but eventually I figured out that it was a cult.
You mentioned your fear of losing God, but then also when you made this decision, it seems to me that you pretty much lost all of your friends, your entire social world in one stroke. And I'm wondering, what does that kind of loss feel like? And what is it like practically, day to day?
Yeah, it was bad. They were my entire social circle. I did have 2 friends outside the group, but other than that, the cult was my entire social circle. And I think fortunately for me, I had a job outside the group as well, and I think that was a real advantage at the time. But it was awful. And I mean, from a day-to-day perspective, I would just do my work. I was self-employed, go home. On the weekends, I just spent it, feeling kind of sorry for myself and processing all the grief that I felt. I mean, that was the biggest thing right at the beginning. There was so much grief because I had lost Michael and I was clearly losing all my friends. And there were a couple of girlfriends that I had in the group. And we sort of, for a little while, tried to pretend like everything was okay. And then eventually they stopped speaking to me as well. And it was just a monstrous, monstrous time. And I'm stunned that I got through it, actually. But it just goes to show how resilient we are. I was close to my mom and stepdad. They had, unfortunately, just that same month that the breakup happened, they had just moved away from Vancouver to Ontario. So unfortunately, they were quite a ways away, but I was still close to them and we spoke on the phone frequently. And I don't know, I just got through it one moment at a time. I did a lot of research eventually about how cults work, and that really helped, but that was several years into the process.
And now we fast forward to almost 5 years after the New Year's Eve breakup with Michael at Wolf's Den. Alexandra has been in therapy. She has read the Guru Papers twice. She is beginning to understand, piece by piece, what she was part of. And then Michael calls, and they agree to meet for dinner.
I was almost 5 years since we had broken up, and so I was 2 years into understanding how cults work, and I think that was really fortunate because while we ate and had our conversation, I could see him flip in and out of his cult persona. And one thing they say about people who are involved in cults is that we always retain our essential self. It's never completely erased. And I could really see that in him while we had supper. You know, he had the same sense of humor and we connected really well and shared, you know, stories about things that had happened to us recently. And he talked about his nieces and nephews and that kind of stuff. But then if he brought up Limori, I could see him flip into his cult persona. And it was like he would almost put a mask on his face. His face would change and his energy would change. And he was very clear about his devotion to her and how it had only strengthened in the 5 years since we'd broken up. And he was calling her Lady Limori at this time. She had decided that she was entitled to this royal title, and she had been using that for a while. So it was it was very confusing. It was also very clear where his allegiances lay. It was heartbreaking. It was just all the things. And yeah, one of the things he said was that for the 5 years that we'd been apart, he'd been holding on to hope that I would come to my senses and come back to Limori and to him, you know, that I would realize that I was in the wrong and that I was serving my ego, which is something they tended to bring up anytime anybody had any objections about the way Limori was treating them. And that the reason he asked us to get together for this dinner was to let me know that he was not going to wait any longer, that he was letting me go, and he had given up hope that I would ever realize what the truth was, according to Limori. I mean, it was fascinating on one hand from a, you know, sociological or psychological perspective to see him flip in and out of his cult self and his authentic self. And, you know, as a human being, it was pretty heartbreaking as well.
Yeah, and so Limori dies eventually. And did that, as far as you know, did that change anything about this group? Did it kind of disintegrate after her death?
Yeah, it was kind of disintegrating before. The classes in Vancouver stopped at some point, but I don't know when because I wasn't involved. And all those people kind of drifted away. And then her main base of operation was at Wolf's Den. And there were 4 or 5 or 6 followers living with her there. And then she died in 2013. And then a year later, 3 of those people that were living there, they left. So it's all just kind of dissolved gradually over the years. And, you know, so much time has gone on now that several other people have died who were living up there. And so now when Limori died, she left the lodge to her son, who was a son that she had from before she started the group. And then he immediately sold it. So it's owned by somebody else now. But Michael and one of the other people that I talk about in the book, a woman named Lisa, are the 2 remaining people who live up there. And yeah, everybody else is just kind of scattered to the 4 winds. And that's about all I know. I know for sure that Michael still believes in Limori, still believes that she was telling the truth about everything, still believes that she was enlightened. And he wrote a book about her and her greatness and what an amazing prophet she was.
Yeah, that was such an interesting twist. And I would really encourage our readers, when they read your book, to make sure you read to the very end, because you included a number of updates in your book which are very enlightening and very interesting and really very important to this story. And that was one of them, that he wrote a book, which seemed to me like he was maybe writing the book in response to yours in some way. Is that possible?
Yeah, I wonder. I kind of think that maybe that was part of the motivation.
Yeah. Well, you end the book by saying that recovery is a road of recovery, not a road to it. So with that in mind, where are you today on your road of recovery?
Yeah, it's not a destination, I guess is the way we could say it. It's a journey. And well, it's interesting. I think, I spent a lot of years in therapy, a lot of years reading books about cults to help me understand what had happened to me. I still to this day listen to podcasts like yours with other people who have been in cults. And I think, though my primary parts of my healing are finished, if we can use that word, I think it's something that will live with me forever. It was a really big part of my life. And well, you can hear I still have emotional reactions to certain things that happen or certain memories that I access. And it's not like it's with me all the time, but I do feel my body react in certain situations. Yeah, I just think recovery is a process for sure. And it's something that I really appreciated working on. I didn't just want to push it away and pretend it hadn't happened. It really mattered to me to get to the bottom of understanding what had happened and how one gets drawn in to that sort of thing. If I hadn't done that work, it would have felt like holding a basketball or a beach ball under the water. That takes a lot of energy to push something down and pretend it didn't happen. So I didn't want to do that. I wanted to bring it all to the surface and express it and heal it. And I did that with the help of really great therapists and other personal work that I did.
I suspect there will be people listening to this podcast who are in one of these high control groups, and they realize it, or at least they're beginning to realize this. What is the most important thing that you would want them to hear?
That they can trust their feelings of doubt or whatever, their thoughts of confusion or thoughts of doubt or the reaction in their body and in their mind to things that they are being told they shouldn't have a reaction to, or that they are being told is a positive experience. That's the thing we all need to understand, I think, is that we can trust ourselves. We can trust our body's response to things. And then second, I would say most importantly, that you're not alone, that if this has happened to you, there's lots of support available, lots of free information available for anyone who doesn't have the resources to go into therapy. There are tons of books and podcasts like yours, Rob, that are out there trying to help people to understand what has happened to them.
Tell us what you're up to these days. You wrote this wonderful book, but that's not the only book that you've written. There's a number of others that you have out there. And, how can people interact with your work?
I have an author website. It's alexandraamor.com. And you'll find my other books there, which are mostly fiction. I write mystery novels. And then I work as a coach for people who are wanting to publish their own books. So there's information about that at theselfpublishingcoach.com. And yeah, my book is called Cult a Love Story. It's available wherever you buy books online. You can also ask for it at your public library or at your favorite local independent bookstore. And I narrated the audiobook, and that's available wherever you get audiobooks, including at the library. if you have a premium subscription at Spotify, you can also listen to it there.
I have one more question for you, Alexandra, as we wrap up the podcast today. Michael is still alive, and who knows, maybe he will hear this podcast somehow. If by any chance he was listening to our conversation, is there anything you would want to say to him?
Wow, that's a great question. You know, I'm completely caught, because if he's listening, then it's his cult self that's listening, and there's really nothing that I can say to that person, and nothing that he would listen to from me. And I think really my book was a love letter to him. You know, I wanted to see if it was possible, if I could get through to him about what was happening. And that wasn't the case, but I tried.
Well, Alexandra, I want to thank you so much for joining us on the How We Escaped podcast, and for having the courage and the boldness to share your story, which I know has been and will continue to be a great help to others. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Rob. It has been such a pleasure to be on the show, and I'm so grateful to you for the work that you're doing, sharing the episodes that you do for others to help them with their journeys as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Well, we did not have nearly enough time today to cover Alexandra's entire story, so please go out and get her book. It's called Cult, A Love Story. Wherever you are listening, please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. Our next story is coming soon, and you will not want to miss it. I want to end our show today with a quote from the author G.K. Chesterton. You'll find this quote in Alexandra's book as well. Chesterton wrote, "The way to love anything is to realize that it might be lost." Until we meet again, I'm Rob Drake. Yellabye.
Have a story to share with us? Visit howweescape.com to get in touch.
How We Escaped.